I'm Sarah Tucker, your Sheila Frahm. You have very kindly agreed to take part in the Kansas Women Legislators Oral History Project. And this is, what is today?
21st?
21st.
22nd.
22nd of January, 1991. And we are in the state capital of Kansas. And you understand, I hope, that this will produce a transcript. You will have a chance to check the accuracy of this transcript, make any changes you feel you should make, and that you will receive a copy. A copy will be deposited in the Kansas State Historical Society archives. A copy will be deposited at Washburn's Mabee Library, and it will be the basis of scholarly research.
I understand. Thank you, Sarah.
Good. First of all, I'd like to establish your legislative identity. You are a senator.
Correct.
From the 40th District,
Correct.
Colby, which is, I think of it as the far northwest corner of Kansas.
It is. It's the 12 counties in northwest Kansas.
12 counties in northwest Kansas. You were elected first time in 1988.
Correct.
So you are in the middle, second half of your first term.
Correct.
I'd like to begin with your early personal background, where you were born, when, if you don't mind saying, what kind of family circumstances you grew up in.
Okay. I was born in Colby, in Thomas County, small rural hospital. I'm the oldest of 5 children, 1 sister and 3 brothers. Farm family. Our farm heritage and tradition goes back many generations. Early 1800s, settled in Thomas County. All 4 grandparents, 2 paternal and 2 maternal, so we can identify many generations of ancestry, and all were involved in farming, with the exception of one great-grandfather who was a city employee, ran the power plant in Colby. So the heritage is very much western Kansas. Being the oldest and a farm family, I was born in 1945 in March. It was not blizzarding that day, but most years it is blizzarding in March in Colby and Thomas County. I never had cashmere sweaters, being the oldest in a farm family. In a time of struggle. My father was just coming back from World War II as I was growing up as a young child. I don't have recollection of that, but I know it impacted my mother and my family.
Okay. So would you call it a traditional family?
Oh, very much. Yes. Mother at home, which is very traditional of farm families. I know what I wanted to say and lost my train of thought, Sarah. Never had cashmere sweaters. Didn't know that was any great loss, but it was also not unusual to have steak for breakfast, which to my city colleagues later, as I went to college and talked to girls from other parts of the state, that's very unusual. Well, we grew our own cattle, fed them, obviously. Beef in the freezer was no big deal. So it's all in your perspective of what you have and don't have. So
you, as a child, certainly did not feel deprived or suffering.
No.
Later on you discovered
that I didn't know.
Steak in the freezer, but no cashmere sweaters.
Certainly, and that's an extreme example.
Well, I think that brings it alive. Where were you educated?
Colby through 12th grade, Colby High School. At that point it was Colby Community High School. That was before consolidation, which is an important part of rural school districts. And then 4 years at Fort Hays. I graduated from, then it was a college, now Fort Hays State University in business education. At that point we immediately went to University of Texas in Austin, where my husband got his master's degree, got his MBA in Texas, and I had opportunity to take child development classes, which I'd never had opportunity to take before, and that was the era of new math. So I took as much new math as I could get a hold of, auditing a couple of classes, which the professor was very happy to let me do, because it was such a new, faddish thing. So no degree from UT, but certainly a strong feeling about the university since we spent a year and a half there.
So, your husband was a childhood sweetheart or somebody?
Oh, yes. His family, also not quite as many generations back, but also Thomas County family. Ken was 14 and I was 15 when we began dating.
That's wonderful. How then did you come to get into politics?
We were away from Colby for 10 years with the Fort Hays 4 years, 2 years at the University of Texas, a year in Chicago, living in a high-rise apartment on the 43rd floor right on Lake Michigan, overlooking the entire city. Incredible experience which we wouldn't trade for anything, but certainly missed the prairies of Kansas. Then 4 years in Wichita. First home, first church, establishment of family, etc. And then the decision, would we farm or would we not farm? And I should have known always and had no opposition, but hadn't really put into words that my husband was going to be a farmer no matter what.
Now, what was his education in exactly?
He has an MBA.
MBA. Okay, makes sense, especially today in farming.
Which makes his farming attitude a little different than the grandparents and parents, I'm sure. In returning to Colby, we made a list, which is something we've always done, take advantage of any opportunity that comes along, evaluate it carefully. A list of reasons we should move to Colby, or reasons we shouldn't. And the list to move there, obviously, was longer we did. We've loved being back in Colby, wouldn't trade it for anything. It's home. It's easy to raise the children in a small town. We've valued that experience. He's farming. I'm doing the support work. Papers, going for parts, making sure there's meals in the field, those kinds of things that a farm wife does. What else am I going to do? The children, we had 2 daughters at that point, are in grade school, and an opportunity to run for the school board, the local board, and thus began.
Okay, so when did you first run for the school board?
May I pull my resume?
Certainly can.
We ought to give you exact figures instead of, and Sarah, I may have to pull it off the computer, but
Fine with me. I appreciate the accuracy.
I believe I have a relatively accurate copy.
And of course, eventually we will be doing all the other background work. This is your version of it.
Certainly. No, this is probably as accurate as we can get, so we could look on there. I don't know that I can give you the exact date.
Kansas State Board of Education appointed
Well, we need to go back to the local
but that's
board.
not helping a lot, is it?
The local board. We'll have to figure it out.
It's okay. We'll figure it out. Would you say about 10 years ago, maybe? Or?
No, it would have to be longer, approximately.
Okay.
Well, I served 7 years on the local board, and then nearly 3 on the state board before this. So 10 years in round figures.
And I take it that this Board of Education, first locally and then state, was very much a political education for you?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
What did it do? What did you...
Local politics is a totally different, of course, than, for one thing, it's no partisan. It's nonpartisan for local school boards, so you're not a Republican or a Democrat, but certainly the politics of a small town and school is so critical, and how much money goes to hire the coach and how much money goes to hire the math teacher. And should you have one who does both, you're in wonderful shape to pass a bond issue. You combine a gymnasium with a elementary classroom complex too. So that kind of keeping the taxes down and providing all you need, that kind of politics, rather than the parochial or partisan politics we look at now. Excellent beginning to understand why and where and what we're trying to do in politics.
And I take it you liked it, or?
Very much. Very, very much. Extremely frustrating days, of course. A particular interest of mine is special education. Colby is one of 20 schools in an educational service center, in a co-op working together to provide special ed. Each of the boards involved has a representative on that. I also had the opportunity to serve on that. That was probably more political than even the local board, in the sense that you've got to satisfy having one board member from all schools, all the same size, Colby being the largest school, down to Herndon, which is the smallest school in the state of Kansas. the needs of those two schools while we joined together, still our needs were very diverse, nonetheless, even though we're all still small rural schools. That's kind of like comparing Colby to Topeka, almost, the bigness and littleness, and yet we've got to cooperate. That same number of superintendents meet, that same number of board members meet, and you must pull all your urgencies together to accomplish what the children need. So those two experiences for nearly 7 years. Then attended a meeting, and a Saturday night we'll probably never forget. Kansas Association of School Boards had their annual hog roast in Topeka, which is because I was a member of their legislative committee, beginning to be interested, obviously, in what was happening in Topeka. Learned that our local State Board of Education representative, representing the 34 counties of western Kansas, would be resigning. I had 30 days and 64 voters. It's a very unusual situation because it was to be an appointment by the chairman and co-chairman of each of the 34 counties. It is an elected board, but when there's an appointment. So I had 1 month, and I knew exactly which 64 people, number one, I had to get to the caucus, and number two, had to give their vote. They had to come from as far away as Liberal and St. Francis and Hayes and Ellenwood to come into Scott City. They called it a central location, which was to my advantage, certainly, to receive that appointment. Got it.
You got it.
Got it.
And obviously greatly enjoyed
Very
the
much.
skills and all the rest that went into getting it.
I think my background, at least one of the other individuals who wanted it was also a local board member and served on his local education co-op. So they had to decide who they wanted, and we had to settle them. And a campaign doesn't have to be expensive, and it doesn't have to be lengthy. You can do it very cheaply with your home copy machine, and a lot of time in 1 month.
Obviously so. I'm impressed. Okay. How then did you come to be asked or decide to run for Senate?
Well, 12 counties. It's a large area. I think that our powers that be in that area, be them Republican or Democrat, are always kind of conscious of someone who's interested. Part of being in politics is being in the right place at the right time. And while I didn't plan it since I was in kindergarten and worked toward this step by step by step, which some people feel they have done, as I told you, we try to take advantage of every opportunity that can come our way, certainly. It began to be apparent that perhaps a House seat might be available. As it turned out, the Senate seat was available sooner, and we were once again in the right place at the right time. And I do say we in this situation because without my husband's support, far northwest Kansas, we don't come to Topeka and do what we've been able to do without a lot of working together.
So, I take it the Republican slot was empty. You were able to...
No, I replaced a Democrat senator who had been there for 16 years.
I see.
Hadn't decided if he would run. I believe preferred to look on to other things, but had to know he could find those other things before he made his decision. So that did not affect whether or not I was going to run or not.
Okay.
But on the other hand, we have to be in the right place at the right time. I believe it was people knowing a time for change also.
Okay. Let's see, you were born in 1945. You were then 42, 43, 43.
Well, 42, that's right.
42.
Yes.
Okay. How did you win? You suggested it was time for change.
We didn't have to campaign on that. That was not, this past 2 years, time for change was the urgency in all campaigns. My situation was not that, except I think that just after 16 years, people were ready for a change. And as it turned out, there were two people running. My opponent in the race was appointed to fill the vacancy of our past senator, but he had never really served. Came to a couple interim committee meetings, so he couldn't really run as a true incumbent. So it wasn't time for a change in that sense, but a time for looking at possibilities. How did I win? I worked like a slave.
I've heard that.
12 counties, 12 county fairs and 12 farm bureau meetings and 12 school board meetings and 12 county commission meetings and 12 reunions in the park and every event, and then door to door in all 12 counties. It's an unusual, it's different. One of my colleagues would tell you that she can almost out her front door see all of her district. You know, I may need to drive 2 hours before I can get out of the car to begin my door to door. The difference of the districts, certainly a lot of road time. A lot of road time. People in our area may not have an opinion, may not care what I'm going to do, but are interested to know that I care. I or anyone else, that their person cares, and so they're glad to see us. They don't always get that opportunity. So that was important, and certainly my commitment that they'd see me more than just during the election, and they have.
Can you tell me something about what organization you use? No matter how hard you worked, you had to build an organization also.
First of all, raising over $50,000, which at the time seemed as though it might be impossible, and thinking back, almost feels impossible. People in my part of the state are not used to giving money, and if they give $5, they feel like surely they've made a significant contribution. And when a little old lady walks across town, many blocks, to bring me her $5 check, beaming from ear to ear, it is from her heart, and it does mean a lot to her.
But you've got to have an awful lot of $5.
Yes, you did.
Was that basically what you did, was get a lot of people?
I have a lot of individuals, and they weren't all $5, but there were very, very few $500 also. And so yes, it takes a long time to add up, but those people have a lot of commitment and a lot of interest. And hopefully they tell someone who tells someone. I had a contact person or county chairman in each county, not necessarily the Republican chairman. You know, there is a Republican chair and co-chairman each state, and I don't mean that. I mean for my campaign.
Yeah.
Sometimes there were overlaps. Obviously, there was at least one school board member in every town that I could call on.
Yes.
So certainly my advantage of having worked not only on the local board and gone to school board meetings, worked with teachers, worked with administrators and knowing them in all the districts, but also was the special ed co-op, because then a close-knit working with another group of school district individuals. Certainly didn't hurt my contacts to begin. I didn't want to be just an education, though I think it's obvious to you that's very important to me. I was not just an education candidate. In fact, I had to fight that a little bit to have a little bit broader image. Certainly I am a farmer. I own land, and that's very important. And I understand that our small main streets do not exist if the farm community isn't thriving and able to come to town and purchase. So I have to have understanding. I had to prove that I had understanding of all those different circumstances. I suppose we're perceived as upper middle class, and so I need to be concerned about the little people also, and not just the children, but the old people and the poor people. And so try to, you don't satisfy everybody all the time, but more than just education. So the importance of a contact person, and often a school board member, then was a respected community individual. Branched out from there, and in some counties had a sizable group of individuals working. We needed to have a fundraiser in nearly every county. Didn't always have a huge crowd, but we sent out a lot of invitations. Didn't always raise huge amounts of money, but people had an opportunity. And one more time, my name was in their mailbox with the name of someone they knew. Because obviously I was not known, and still am not known by everyone in 12 counties. Hopefully Frahm is a name they're beginning to recognize after 2 years. But it's not automatic.
Where did you get all these names? I take it was just...
Well, you start with the base, and the school board was the base in many communities when I didn't know someone else. Or maybe we knew the John Deere dealer in a town. Or perhaps it was a teacher. A couple of towns it was a very important a person who was very important to me was a teacher. One town it was a minister who used to be a minister in Colby and now is a minister in one of the neighboring towns. You I think you take whomever. Sometimes it's, I can think of one little community, the gentleman who worked for me and organized his county used to serve on an endowment board at the vocational school with my father.
Okay. I guess the reason I ask you is, in general, I get the impression that it's kind of up to the candidate to do a lot of this work, as opposed to the local Republican or Democratic Party steps in and says, this is what you're going to do.
Okay, yes, that's true, I believe, Sarah. As a state board of education member, which is a partisan position, I had made a point of keeping very close contact with the county chairman and co-chairman of each of the counties. So there was an automatic tie. But I had a primary. So before the primary, technically, none of those really should take a position until after the primary. Now, some were working for me, but that's okay. You know, they didn't need to be public about it somewhere, but that's circumstances. I could not count on them to be my structure. And I took the position that I wanted them on my team, but they had party work to do. And I needed their help and their support, but I also needed to have my own structure. Nobody told me I had to.
You just knew.
Well, I wanted to have somebody to call down there. You know, some other far strange town. And I wanted them to call me and say, Sheila, there's a reception at the city park at 4 o'clock next Sunday afternoon, and you ought to be there. You know, it's a public meeting. Well, I read all the newspapers, but I needed them to identify with, or if they were hearing rumblings, or I can't be in every town in 12 counties, and I can't keep a finger on them. And it's not like there's the Topeka Capitol doing the news for one town. So the pulse from each of those areas, from my contact individuals, be they friends, acquaintances, whatever, is critical.
Okay. Can you tell me, were there any issues that you felt were make or break issues in your campaign?
There are several issues that could have been, except that I and my opponent came down very similar on many of them. Capital punishment could have been a make or break. We have people who are opposed to capital punishment, I'm sure, but we also are a capital punishment part of the state. That is something that's very important. It happens that was my position, or it has been my position. I sense that my opponent chose to have the same position over his wife's dead body. He was facing some dilemma himself. Abortion could have become an issue. Could potentially have been critical, but once again, after I stated my position, we found his to be very simple.
Are you safe for the record what your position
Certainly.
is?
Our youngest daughter, my position on abortion is not just black and white. It is not a black and white issue. Our youngest daughter is an adopted child. I'm very, very glad her birth mother, who I know, did not have an abortion. So it's an emotional issue for us. But I am not in a position to tell anybody how to live their life or what to do. I hope and would encourage any young woman to go to her mom or her dad. Being the mother of 3 daughters, don't ever want my daughters to have to make that decision by themselves if they're in that situation. Don't think the government should make that decision. Certainly don't support 3rd trimester abortions. Some would perceive that we're trying to keep everybody happy, but that's how I feel.
Thank you. I think you've told me part of the nature of your district, but I would like to just make sure we got it. You have 12 county district. Its makeup is generally western Kansas farming.
Agriculture is our prime and almost only industry.
Is there anything else about your district which seems to you important because
It's a very, very conservative part of the state. Not inclined to elect women or young people.
it seems to have elected you? What did you do right?
Well, there are some who still, I'm sure, would sit in the coffee shop and say, well, I'm certainly never going to vote for a woman. So now, in the next election, I have to persuade them there's reason to now vote for them. We're also, statistically, the area of the greatest aging. So the average age of my constituents would be older than other parts of the state. And that continues to be the case. Additionally, our district is probably second in needing to, how do I phrase this? I'm referring to reapportionment. Second in declining population is how I should phrase it, Sarah. We will pick up at least 4 new counties in addition to my 12, which gives you a real feel of what's happening to the people in Kansas, and they're not moving into western Kansas.
That is a dramatic statement.
My district unquestionably has the largest geographic area in the state. I mean, that's already obvious, and certainly will even be more so as we look at the map after reapportionment.
So, what issues, other than those you've already told me about, are going to be or are important to your district?
Well, the federal government determines the farm program, but we at the state government determine taxes, be it on sales tax or property tax for our constituents. That's important to all business people, certainly a question of if you're going to have to buy a $150,000 combine, and that's before you buy a cutter bar for wheat or a corn head, 4 3/4% sales tax is significant. Obviously, I feel that's an exemption that has proven itself.
I look forward to hearing the debates. Here you are. You're in the legislature. You are a freshman. What committees?
We like to feel like surely we were done being freshmen in the first year.
Okay. You used to be a freshman. What committees did you want to get on? What committees did you get on?
The committees that I requested, I received. I wanted committees that, number 1, I could use my expertise, and number 2, represented my district. Obviously, I asked for Education Committee, and I asked to be Vice Chairman, and I am. I asked for Agriculture. I asked for Energy and Natural Resources. I asked for Local Government. No one has more local governments than I do. And I asked for Assessment and Taxation. In the last 2 years, I couldn't have been more in the middle of the fire with those committees. When our leadership called and said, yes, Sheila, you can have the committees you asked for, they said, if you'll also chair Administrative Rules and Regulations, being naive and freshman, I said, sure, that sounds fine to me. Administrative Rules and Regs has turned out, it's a joint committee, I chair it every other year with the House Chairman. Has turned out to be one of my greatest joys. It is painstakingly tedious because you read everybody's rules and regs, every organization, every agency, every department, public and private, that they must write to carry out the intent of our legislation. And so I've learned far more than I ever realized I would learn as a result.
Spell it out for me. Why is it a joy?
The details, to find out how an agency comes to the point of writing their rules and regulations, how they think they're going to carry out our law. Are they trying to carry it out?
Actually, we are all right,
Well, you
but
might
I
change it.
always panic. Oh, stop that.